Welcome to the Kayak Bass Connection podcast. This is our first episode. We'll be taking a deep dive, discussing a specific technique with one of our experts in bass fishing. We'll get to learn more about how to use that technique to connect with more bass. So tonight, Jonathan Michael Kessler, one of our tournament champs from the Southern Illinois Kayak Club, has agreed to sit down with us and discuss jigs, a deep dive into the jigs. Welcome back to the podcast, Jonathan.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here.
So if anybody's seen the podcast before, Jonathan's been on here several times because he keeps cashing checks on tournament days. Certainly has been one of the top anglers on the Sick Bass Tournament Trail over the last few years. He's also part of the team that won our biggest event of the year, the Crossroads Classic. He was just going to show you a little bit later on exactly how the biggest day total ended up in the boat. So one thing you're going to find about Jonathan, when he shows up for a tournament, he's always a threat to take your money. So when someone on a hit like him agrees to sit down and tell us a few secrets and give us some tips, we're anxious to do that. So thank you again.
Of course. And like I said, one of the things that keeps me in the contention for the money is it doesn't really matter what time of the year. I always show up with a jig
on. That's interesting. So for the listeners out there, so here's what we're going to cover. We want to cover when to use those jigs, where to use them, and how to use them in a very general sense. Seems like I always have some on the boat, and frankly, after seeing you win and more, there's a few more that have made its way to my tackle box, but I'm still not sure I'm using them right. So let's just kind of kick off. When did you start using jigs predominantly for a lot of your bass fishing?
Well, I'll tell you, I have to give a lot of a shout out to a buddy of mine, Dustin Siegel, who is one of the people that got me interested in kayak fishing in the first place. I think very similar. He could tell you the same story that I tell you, me to him, as he could to some people that taught him how to fish, and that is jigs catch fish year round, and it's how you use them and where you use them that might change, but the jig is something that I think, I usually take about somewhere between 6 to 8 rods every time I go out to a tournament, and the jig is on there every single tournament that I get to. It's always tied on.
So you're talking about all the way through, say, winter type fishing, through spring, summer, fall.
Size might change, color changes, but I will always have a jig winter, summer, spring, fall.
Okay,
it's always on there.
So let's get specific on when we say jig. There's a million different things that come to people's mind. So you're talking about just a lead jig with a skirt, lead or tungsten?
Lead tungsten jig. In my mind, when I'm saying jig, I predominantly am talking about a flipping jig, and I'll just show a little example right here. This is, I think this is a 3/4 ounce Missile Ike flip out jig. In what they call dill pickle, which is really kind of a green pumpkin with a little bit of chartreuse worked into the paint job here into the skirt. And I throw a plastic trailer on that, and this is my go-to. This is my go-to almost anytime I'm out there. This is almost the first thing I pick up, depending. In the morning, sometimes I might start out top water, but this is my go-to. And there's many types of jigs. There you can swim jigs, flipping jigs, pitching jigs, bladed jigs. You can go down the whole list. But what I really focus on is this flipping jig right here, because I think it's very versatile. If you pick up a flipping jig, it's usually it's not quite football shaped or football head shaped jig. And so if you need to, you can kind of swim that sort of thing. I may not swim a 3/4 ounce, but I also, for example, if I'm in the winter or if I'm in, I'd fish this all the way up through pre-spawn. I would, maybe downsize that a little bit. So this is, in comparison, a mini flip out. It's also a product of Missile. It's a little bit lighter. I think this is a 3/8 ounce, and it's the mini flip. So you kind of get a size comparison right there. Predominantly, the main size difference is in the hook, and I'm kind of covering that up with my finger. But slightly smaller, thinner hook, smaller weed, shorter weed guard. skirt. I like these jigs. I don't modify them. I don't need to modify the skirt. I think that's about the right length. I don't need to
Mm.
modify or cut off the wheat guard. I think everything right here is just about perfect. So I really like this specific jig, both the mini flip out and the full size flip out. And I'll tell you, starting in the winter, I'll start out with something small, and I'll start with this color. So
Okay.
early on in the year, the water is usually coming off of that winter is really dirty. After the lake turns over, I think the lake stays pretty dirty throughout the winter if we're in the Midwest, and so I want a lot more contrast. And so I'll go with that black and blue as my primary color. And the only other real transition that I make throughout the year is that when we hit late March, well, maybe even late April, when the water starts to clean up, the rain starts to slow down just a little bit, that's when I switch to the green pumpkin, just flat green pumpkin, as drab as it can be,
Mm.
no color, nothing special, just a straight
Wow.
green pumpkin. And I try to match it as close as I can in terms of drab. Put a trailer on there. If I give it some color, the only color that I give it is maybe just a little flake. This trailer right here, this is also from Missile. It's a D-bomb. You can tell I'm a little bit of a Missile fan.
Yeah.
But the Missile D-bomb, this is the full-size D-bomb. It's a very large
Yeah.
trailer. So in the winter, with that black and blue, I honestly will shorten it up. I might throw this with no trailer, or if I want to do a really short trailer, I take like a Strike King Rage Tail Menace Scrub or Rage Menace. This is just white as an example of the actual product. I might bite that off about halfway down that body and use that as just a very short trailer on that jig, just a tiny little, kind of crawl style trailer on that.
I notice your color changed there too through your trailer. Almost a dynamic difference there on the trailer color.
This one, again, I just kind of grabbed some from the garage.
Okay.
I would put a black and blue. I think
Okay.
the Rage might have two different variations of black and blue. They might have a black with blue flake, and then they might also
Right.
have like a marble kind of black and blue. Either one of those, I would
Okay.
probably use that on this jig. And I just downsize it. In the winter, most of these fish, I think, are looking for anything to sustain their metabolism. Kind of same thing kind of happens.
Mm.
And during the spawn, I might see a little bit of a decline in my jig use in exchange for some things when they're kind of sitting on
Mhm.
beds. Right before the spawn, in terms of just slight jig variations, I'll probably start swimming this a lot more when the water temp starts to hit 65 degrees. Obviously, whenever you get there, we're not talking about this today, but that bladed
Yeah.
jig is
Yeah.
big whenever you hit that early
So
pre-spawn
you throw
period.
that 65 degrees out there. You think the metabolism is quick
65
enough to?
degrees, they start speeding up. And at 65 degrees, I switch from winter pattern. I start switching predominantly into this. That's water
Okay.
temp, 65 degrees water temp. And I start kind of really throwing moving things. And
Hmm.
you can talk to Darren Hemker about what kind of bad business this exact
Yeah.
lure can
Yeah.
do for you. I think you hit
Yeah.
100 inches. I don't
Yeah.
want to give too much away, but
Yeah.
I won't say where, when, or how, but that's a good bait. Uh,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but on this jig, I'll fish this kind of smaller black and blue profile. Pre-spawn hits, I'll continue to flip this, but I'll flip this shallower. I'll flip it near structure. I think
Okay.
in that pre-spawn period, you're really looking for hard structure right on the edge when you're entering into spawning coves. Like really kind of getting into the spawning cove just a little bit and focusing on that hard structure way up shallow when that water temp gets over 65 degrees.
So now talking about structure, how does that do on wood? I know where
Yeah, so
I
I'll
fish
throw it
like them.
right on the edge of the wood structure, and I'll throw right up on
Okay.
the bank. And if you have an opportunity,
Hmm.
don't underestimate the splashing something down. Especially from kayaks, it's really hard to really get a nice soft landing, as opposed to a boat where you can really kind of flip or pitch and kind of get a light landing with the jig. A lot of times to make up for that, I will just cast this thing right onto the shoreline and drag it in, so that
Just
it
to make
really
a quiet
doesn't.
entry.
Just to make a quiet entry into the
Okay.
water. It's especially if I'm sitting down. Who cares? I'll just bang it against the side. If it's kind of a steep slope, I'll just kind
Yeah.
of throw it up against the edge so that it comes in off the edge. don't underestimate the importance of getting that sort of soft entry when you're fishing a flipping jig
Mm.
shallow. I think that's a really
Okay.
important aspect to that. Once
Mm.
the spawn is over, and this is where, for me, the jig goes from being that thing that I always have on me to being almost the only thing that I pick up is as soon as the spawn ends. And once the spawn is done, we know that a lot of the big females, they sort of get scattered. Some go deep, some go shallow.
Mm.
I predominantly am going to look for the big females post spawn that have moved offshore. And when I say offshore, I don't necessarily mean in 20 feet of water. In Illinois, we see that the thermocline usually ranges around 12, maybe
Mm-hmm.
8, as shallow as 8 if
8 to
it's really
12.
dirty, and it goes down to about 12 to 15 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm really trying to hone in and like analyze a lake, I will look for areas that are off away from the shoreline and have a nice large flat that sits pretty close to where I think the thermocline is going to sit. So
Okay.
if we're talking, if I think the thermocline's at 12 feet that time of year, we're hitting June, I will, go to my contour map on my computer and I might filter the depths and change the color palette so that I can see really clearly where it's 8 to 12 feet. And I want to go
Okay.
thermocline to just above the thermocline. And I'm going to look for a flat that's away from the shoreline that hits that particular depth. Because when you're at or above the thermocline, there's going to be a lot of vegetation usually in those areas. That means there's going to be a lot of food, I think, and
Mm.
forage for the bass to
Okay.
hit. And if there's not vegetation, that means it's probably hard bottoms. It's rocks or shells. And again, another really great location for forage for bass. And those
Okay.
females have pushed off. So I will look for those locations and I'll focus. And then the other change that I'll make, and again, full disclosure here, I
Oh.
switch, I upsize. Usually this time of year, the water's clearing up, so I switch to that green pumpkin color.
Mm-hmm.
And I go to about the largest profile that I can find. So I'll put that mini flip, I'll put that away, and I'll pull up the full size flipping jig. I will also put that Menace Crawl trailer away in exchange for that full size debone.
So are you
So
changing with the size of the forage? Is that what you're doing?
so
All right.
what I understand is that post spawn females get the spawning process really wears out the big female bass,
Okay.
and they're really energy depleted, and so they don't have the energy to go chase shad for
Okay.
forage, so they eat less frequently, but they look for more calories each meal that they eat, and so they look for a big easy meal.
Yeah, it makes
Okay.
sense.
And so that brings me, the easy part brings me to the kind of next step, which is like, how do you fish this thing? Like, what are you looking for, and what are you
Mm-hmm.
feeling, and how fast are you swimming it? No, I have learned to take even something that's as large as a 3/4 ounce jig, and I finesse fish this.
Oh,
Um,
I gotta hear how you're doing that.
so, I mean, it's a big,
Yeah.
heavy lure, but I will, first of all, when I cast, I try to make a long cast. Again, it's just it's a process or part of the process in which I don't want to spook any of the fish that might be on a piece of
Mm-hmm.
structure. So if I got that point, I try to get 30, 40 foot away from that, that spot that I've identified that might be offshore.
Okay.
And I will start making, long casts at it. Part of that long cast is the equipment. I use a long rod. Um, Most people might suggest 7.3. I use a 7.6 rod. This is a medium heavy 7.6, and that medium heavy 7.6 gives me, in my mind, the maximum casting distance.
Okay.
Here you can see I have my this is a 1/2 ounce green pumpkin, and
Mm.
this is the bait in the combo that holds the single day record for our Crossroads competition. So I make a long cast onto that point, and I let it drop, and I try to get it to drop on I call it a semi tight line.
Okay.
So as opposed to the line being completely tight, I want to see sort of a droop in the line. I want it to be tight enough that if I get a bite on the drop, I feel it,
You
because
see it.
a large number of times you get a lot of bites on jigs on the drop, in my
Okay.
experience. So I want that to drop fall. I want it to drop straight. I want it to drop naturally, but I also want to be able to feel it, be able to set a
Mm-hmm.
hook immediately if I feel a bite. That thing
Okay.
drops. And the next thing I'm looking for is I'm looking for structure. I'm looking for rocks. Hopefully, like I said, if you get one of these spots, there's either vegetation, there could be rock piles. If you get one of these shallower areas that's off the coast, you see that a lot. And I found several locations where these turned out to be shell beds. And so I'm going to drag that, and I'm going to use and feel that tungsten or lead on the end of that if it's hitting anything. I think tungsten can give you a benefit in that regard because tungsten being denser can give you a
Yeah.
little bit more responsiveness to feeling what's on the bottom. And so I'm
Now,
going to feel rocks.
what kind of line are you using to help you with that?
So that's a good question too. So to get kind of that maximum sensitivity, I use about 30 pound braid
Okay.
to about a 7 foot fluoro leader, and the leader is usually about like a 15 pound test.
Okay.
If I know that I'm going to be fishing offshore, I might go lighter. If I know that I'm going to be throwing this into cover, I might go heavier on the leader. Um, just small variations if I know exactly where I'm going to be throwing this thing. If I know I'm throwing it on rocks all day, I'll probably go a
Mm-hmm.
little bit heavier, 15 to 20 pound leader.
Do you ever
Just to
experiment with the color of your braid? I know there's only a few colors out there available.
I use just
Uh,
the good old
green.
green.
Okay.
Yeah. With the fluoro leader, I just don't think it matters because I'm 6-7 feet of
Mm-hmm.
a leader. Fluoro leader is going to give you good
Okay.
vision, lack of vision. I like the braid because I like the full feel, the full sensitivity,
Right.
being able to feel rocks and structure and everything down there, being able to feel every little bite. But then I drag this thing about 4 inches at a time every couple seconds,
So just a
and
slow drag.
I'm I'm looking for it to hit stuff. I
Hmm.
want to feel it hit rocks. I want to feel it hit something, and
Hmm.
if it hits something, I I don't I avoid at all costs trying to pop the jig real hard. I will drag that thing and try to keep it as subtle as possible because when I pop it, I almost never get a bite afterwards. I know I hear stories and
Oh.
you see guys doing these videos and they're
Hmm.
just slamming these jigs, and that might work in other parts of the country, but in southern Illinois and in
Hmm.
Missouri, I just drag that thing on the bottom, and it might lift off a little bit on my pole and drop right back down, up and down. And I might occasionally give it, those little bitty, the lightest little taps just to give it a little action. Um,
Yeah.
but generally, I'm just pulling it, 4 to 6 inches at a time. And then if I feel that structure, if I feel it hit this rock, and I
Mm.
feel it pull over, and then you feel it drop just a little bit afterwards.
So
Once it
you're
does that,
almost 100% bottom contact. I mean, pretty much.
yeah,
Mm.
100%.
Okay.
100% with the flipping jig and
Mm.
what I'm doing here, especially post spawn. I let that thing come over the rock, it falls, and I let it sit
Mm.
right there, right on the other
Mm.
side of the rock. I think it's probably so close to it, it's probably sticking that thing up a little bit,
Mm.
putting that trailer up in the air. And I'll tell you, you feel that structure and you pull over it, and that thing's sitting right there, and you let it sit there for 3 or 4 seconds. You just let it soak. You maybe give it a little tap so that it
Mm.
shakes. That's where you get your bite.
Really?
Yeah,
So you're.
yeah. I mean, you just come right over the structure and you let that thing just sit there, and you just give it a little,
Mm.
a couple of those maybe, but you let it sit there for 3 or 4 seconds before you tap it, um, and that's when the bite
It's
happens.
tantalizing. It's just sitting there, not moving quickly, just barely enough so it looks like
Just
it's alive, right?
just barely. And I'll tell you,
Yeah.
I go back and forth. I kind of will, take the rod and pull it up to drag it over some stuff. And
Mhm.
sometimes if you're trying to get over something, you really do need to kind of pull the rod tip up. And sometimes I'll just, if it's really the heat of the summer, so the middle of July,
Mhm.
August, I'll just slowly reel, maybe
Mhm.
even a half reel or one reel at a time, just to drag that thing across, keep that tight line the whole time if I'm using the reel. Um, but that's my secret. That's the trick. That's
So,
the
so, so
real
really, you're talking
slow.
about in the middle of summer when metabolism should be the highest. You're actually, when it comes to jigs, you're actually just still moving very slow.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
targeting those spots, right? I'm targeting
Okay.
those spots where we're talking about fish that are sitting in the cold water a lot more often than the fish that are way up shallow. Because
Mm-hmm.
I what I've seen at least in kayak tournament fishing is that 80% of your anglers are fishing 5 foot of the shore,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm 40 foot off. You know, I hate to say that I'm fishing deep because I'm fishing 8 foot usually, 8 to 10
Yeah.
foot, but I'm targeting these spots that are way offshore where the fish are sitting. You know, they're sitting in cool water and they're coming up onto these flats to feed, and
Mm.
so their metabolism is probably a little bit slower. It's also darker, right? Because you are talking 8 to 10 foot depth. There's a lot less light down there. And
Okay.
so them being able to pick out this little natural colored object sitting down there at the bottom is probably a little bit harder for them to see. And so if you're going too fast and you're in that kind of a depth, I think you're going to lose that. Now I'll still fish shallow, like I said, in the pre-spawn. That's when I'll focus this in a foot of water. But once that summer hits, I'll upsize 3/4 ounce, full size, like I said, full size trailer, and I'll focus predominantly on that deeper structure.
Now, do you ever make any adjustments for water clarity? I know that, some of the lakes that I've seen fish tournaments with you in, some of them are, pretty clear for a Midwestern lake, and some of them are just muddy. Have you? Do you experiment at all there?
I only ever switch up between black and blue and
Okay.
green pumpkin. So
Okay.
again, if it is summer and it's really really chalky, I just go
Mm-hmm.
back to that black and blue. I'll use the full size.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll use like the full size at a half ounce or something as a 3/8. Um, but I'll switch to black and blue if it's usually I say the cutoff is around 6 inches to a foot of visibility. So if it's over a foot, I will 100% of the time throw green pumpkin or a variation of green pumpkin. And I'll talk about the variation here in a minute.
Okay.
But generally, all throughout the summer, I stick with green pumpkin. Again, the black and blue, if it does get really chalky, so for like right after a big thunderstorm, it's really
Mm-hmm.
chalky or something, I might switch that up. Um, the trailers are designed, or something that matches. Might throw in that little sparkle. So here might be able to see that's this is
Okay.
a green pumpkin with a blue flake. I really like that because our bluegill here in Southern Illinois got that
Yeah.
sort of cyan blue um, spot colors to them. When will I switch? So I'll fish that all summer. All summer, I'll focus on that until the end of August. And
Oh.
September hits. We know that bass fishermen love fishing in the summer. They love fishing in the fall and the winter a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more, or fall and spring a little bit more. But the boats are going to be high traffic all summer. Eventually, that high traffic leads to pressure, and the bass start to get a little bit smarter. And I think that's why you start to see this thing drop off pretty early when you start hitting like September, mid-September. And that's when I start switching out. This one's beat up a little bit. It's supposed to have a black head, but this is, I think, I call this super bug. It's sort of a mix between a green pumpkin and a black and blue.
Okay.
This is that dill pickle color,
The
which
dill
is
pickle.
sort of a green pumpkin with a little bit of chartreuse in there. I'll make a slight variation on that green just to sort of combat the pressure.
Hmm.
I think a lot of guys know green pumpkin is it's in everybody's tackle
Kind of
box.
universal almost. Yep.
Yeah, and the bass just get used to this eventually. They just do.
Yeah.
So I make slight variations, just slight variations later in the year,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kept my jig bite going. It keeps it going into the fall.
Are those silicone or rubber skirts? Do you know which?
Oh, that's
Probably
a good question.
silicone.
I think these are the rubber.
Okay.
They're the ones that break easier. They're not like that Z-Man stuff. They're
All right.
definitely more of a traditional rubber. I will admit that these I go through quite a bit of these, but I will leave one on with one trailer. Like if one tail comes
Okay.
off, I'll stick through it.
So you don't modify them yourself. You just use them straight out of the package, right? Put your
I
trailer
use
on
them
and
out of the
go.
package. I usually bite quite a bit off. Uh,
Okay.
there is an exception for this one. This one here, there's nothing bit off of this. This is full.
Okay.
This is like July. Like I want that full size. I want all of it.
Hmm.
Later on in the year, I will start to slowly downsize, and that's because you get the spawn in the spring, and in about a year, those bait fish kind of mature to full size. So by the time you hit fall, you have the fish that were born in spring, which are
Mm-hmm.
small. You have the ones that were born the previous spring, which are now full size mature. And in the fall, you have almost nothing that's in that middle region, like that middle size.
Okay.
So in the fall, it's like big or small, take your pick. One color variation, one time I will occasionally deviate from my kind of green pumpkin or black and blue rule is in that fall. In the fall, I will throw out this one. I actually cut off
Is
of.
that purple? What is that?
This is a by PB&J. I don't know what
The
Bissell calls it. They
PB&J.
might call it something else, but
Hmm.
this is a rage crawl trailer, I think, and it's missing a crawl, but it's
Okay.
it's a PB&J trailer and it's a PB&J jig, so it's a little
Okay.
brown. It's very like that brown is also a very natural color, sort of like the green pumpkin.
Hmm.
And then that purple, in my mind, just gives it a little bit of something to stand out, like a little bit of variation in there. So this fall, I'll throw this in the mix. But generally speaking, it's 100% green pumpkin until
Wow.
September, until the end of September almost. So,
Hmm.
and then, like I said, that's when I haven't cleaned anything out since the fall. So
Yeah.
we're sitting here in the winter, and I have all my fall jigs still waiting to be put
So,
away.
so you've talked about rocks and wood. What about vegetation? I mean, we deal with a lot of milfoil, a lot of different types of vegetation throughout the summer. Um,
Treat it like a
are you
rock.
treat it like a rock?
Treat it like a rock.
Okay.
So you will see that if you're looking for these specific areas, these flats, these places that are
Hmm.
going to hold bait that are near deeper areas, for example, you're going to find vegetation in some cases. Arguably, my one of my summer wins this year was at Banner, and what I found there was again deeper areas, really close to nice shallow areas, lots of vegetation, lots of oxygen, and
Mm.
what I predominantly focused on there was, well, I'm going to have to throw this thing in the veg. Exact
Hmm.
same thing. Um, I just treat those, in this case, it was like a milfoil. And so you get these long strands of grass. I treat it just like I treat the rocks. I just try to avoid having to rip it. You're going to have to
Hmm.
rip a jig through grass occasionally when you're trying to flip it in there. But as long as I can pull it through the grass and get it through the grass with a nice kind of soft touch, finesse kind of feel, I'll
Okay.
just keep doing that,
So
and they'll
are you
pick it
still
up.
trying to maintain bottom contact, or are you trying
Yeah,
to
so
swim it? Okay.
I'll let it go over the grass and then fall. So if I'm doing the flipping jig, there is a time and a place, of course, for a swim jig.
Hmm.
Different video.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
and in this case, I will still flip that in there, and I will
Hmm.
try. I'll let that fall all the way down to the bottom. I'll let it sit. I'll pull that thing up. In this case, if it's like this tall milfoil stuff, I
Hmm.
will usually try to lift it up intentionally to get it to come up over the grass, and then pull it down and then let it fall again. And my goal is to just sort of feel it pull free from the grass. As
Then
soon as it's free, it's on a drop
okay.
till it hits the bottom. I let it maintain bottom contact for a second or two, and then I go again. And you want to, and that's pretty much will go all the way through to the fall. The fall is the one season where when you get into the late enough fall, maybe early winter transition even, you'll see the jig trail off because the fish really are trying to bulk up and they're really out there chasing
Mm.
things. And so that's where I really start to focus more on swim jigs, chatterbaits,
Moving baits.
moving baits.
Yeah.
There will be fish still on some of those stationary structures. There still will be fish there, but
Yeah.
the numbers really decrease and the size decreases. The females don't seem to be there.
Okay.
Um, you know, uh, the only other thing is talk about, how do you get them in the boat?
Yeah, that's my
And
next question. So
yeah,
you got the when and where, all right? So we're at the right place. We got the right jig on. We did the
got the
right
right gear,
presentation.
you
So
know.
geared up, right? So now how do we get that hook set done?
So for starters, I'm fishing this with a high speed reel. So this is an
Okay.
8-to-1. I originally started out, I had a Rocket, which is a 10-1, and I'm a
Hmm.
big Abu Garcia reel fan. I'm also a member of Team Kessler, so
Ah.
give a shout out to Team
Mm-hmm.
Kessler. I think Kessler rods are some of the best rods that are out there on the market. Again, I kind of mentioned this. I use a 7.6, 7.6 medium heavy. I think you can get away with the heavy. A lot of people probably fish their jigs on something like a heavy rod. I will explain why I use a medium heavy, and that's predominantly because I truly believe that when you're fishing in a kayak as opposed to a boat, your boat has a lot more give. It's a lot lighter. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
less drag on the bottom of your kayak than on a full-size bass boat or a John boat or any of those sorts of things. So as a consequence, when that fish hooks up, especially a 3 or 4 pound
Mm-hmm.
bass, your kayak moves. We've all felt our boat turn when we've got a nice
Mm-hmm.
bass, right? That movement, though, I can follow with a 7.6 rod.
Yes.
It's hard to maneuver inside of
Yeah.
a home, but you really want your rod to be bent, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really want to see that rod uh, to stay bent, with the only exception being when the fish jumps. And to do that, if that boat is giving, when it gives, it's losing tension
You're
on the
losing
rod.
tension. Yep.
Yeah. So I like to have more give than less give.
Yep.
I will use a heavy rod on Texas rigs and things that I
Mm-hmm.
know I'm going to be throwing into wood. I'm going to be throwing into heavy cover and trees and stuff. But this jig, surprisingly, I'm usually throwing it like just on the side of a log, and I usually have a clean hook set, or I'm
Mm.
throwing it out, like I said, offshore on a rock pile or a drop off or a ledge. And so I don't worry too much about the heavy cover. I want that give, I want that bend to keep that fish pinned as it pulls my kayak and my kayak moves a
Yeah.
little. It's a little bit more forgiving. Also more cast
Yeah.
distance with the medium heavy than with the heavy. So
Mm.
um, that being said, reel fast reel 8-1. I'm fishing this like it's finesse, so I like the high speed. I like to keep tension on it. I like to feel the bottom. I'm really feeling the bottom the whole time. I'm feeling bites. I'm feeling that on the drop, and I want to keep the control over my line and the tension the entire time. So
Okay.
high speed reel, I think, is really, really important. You can probably get away with the 7-3. Um, I find when you're trying to get that slack out of your line every time that drops, or you pull it over structure and it drops and your line goes slack, that's where the
Mm-hmm.
bite happens. It's really helpful to just be able to do like a half turn and pull that
Ah,
slack
okay.
out really quickly and be able to keep that line tight. So to me, this Abu Garcia STX 8-1 is
Mm.
honestly to me the perfect jig. Abu Garcia reels also have the highest drag. So this I think has a 20-pound drag. I hope I don't need every bit of 20 pounds
Yeah.
when I'm bass fishing in Illinois, but I like with a jig rod to be able to pull fish up or control them and have
Okay.
that strong drag. The I'm trying to think of the other aspects to this. This is a KLX rod from Kessler. KLX is a moderate fast um, type rod. It's way more on the kind of softer side in that sense, slower side, but again, that kind of relates back to that extra give.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to having a really fast tip where you don't have much give or it pulls out real quick. Again, that just helps keep the fish pinned. And even though it's more of a finesse technique, I know that this Kessler KLX is a high enough end rod that even with a moderate tip, it's sensitive enough
You're
to
gonna.
feel the bites. So I don't skimp. I think a lot of people think jig. It's this really robust technique. It's heavy. You can kind of skimp on the rod and just throw out a cheap, heavy or medium heavy rod. I like having that nice quality rod. So I got the sensitivity, but I also have a softer action at the same time. Um,
So let's talk about feeling that bite and your reaction to the bite. So you're working the line that's on a semi slack, so you're gonna have a curve, right, from
on the
from
fall,
your
on the drop.
okay on the
Yep,
drop. So
yep.
but once the drop happens, are you keeping
Tight
it
line.
tight?
Yeah,
Tight.
once it's
Okay.
once it's on the bottom, it's a
That could
tight
be
line.
something I'm doing wrong then. Yeah. Right.
Anytime it's dropping though, I'm gonna try
That
to let it
makes
fall straight
yeah.
down. So if it comes over,
Otherwise,
if
you're
you
gonna
pull it over a
pendulum.
rock, yeah, I'm gonna try
Okay.
to let it fall straight. But I want to keep it tight enough that I'm going to feel that bite, because that drop is such an important part in timing and when they bite. I get so many bites on the drop. So
Now you
one of
see
the
that in the line when it's dropping. Will you see that bite?
can. So if you're fishing the same area, like, because I've kind of got a reputation, sometimes I will
Mm.
sit in one area for 8 hours.
Yep,
Um,
I've seen you do that. Yep. And
and
win.
and and you get really good at
Yeah.
feeling, and so sometimes, like,
Hmm.
like, this takes 5 seconds to drop, and
Yeah.
all of a
What's
sudden your line is stopped at like 3.5, and something feels
what's
a little
going
bit
on?
off.
Yeah. What's going on
um,
here?
and people were
Yeah.
at the crossroads, the
Hmm.
judges were sort of watching there, and there were multiple times where I would let that thing drop, and without even touching it, without even taking the slack all the way out, I would just go, kind of look over at one of them and just go, I, I'm going to hook set this. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
What? And it's just, you can, if you're
Just.
really, you watch that line, you can just get a sense as that drops. If you have just enough tension, again, you want it to fall
Mhm.
straight, but you want to keep just enough tension, you'll feel when something's wrong, when something's off, if it starts to move.
Yeah, I
And
think that's been the number one learning point for me over the last few years trying to get better at this game is that what, it's bites are not always tap tap.
no,
it's as a matter of fact, the best fish I've got have been absolutely just almost just irregular. That's it. The line
yep.
didn't do what it did the last 5 times I threw the bait
And
out.
if you're out there and you identify that, if you identify that the
Mm,
bite's different, if you identify you're getting bites, you're getting the tap tap, and your hook setting nothing,
mm,
then I recommend two adjustments. One, if you're throwing your jig and you got that big jig and you got that big trailer, that big crawl or beaver style trailer, and you got that on there, if you get two straight empty hook sets,
mm,
downsize,
just go down. Okay.
downsize. So again, I'll bite that. That might not look a lot smaller, but you can see the tails are smaller, and I'll bite
Mm,
that about halfway down, so that the hook is literally sticking out, like right there, if I'm seeing that.
okay.
Um, so it still gives them it still gives it that action, but there's literally nothing for the fish to grab. There's very little for the fish to grab that's not hook. You'll also see when your trailers are missing and those sorts of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're hitting that back. The other thing is, and this is something new that I've started doing, is when I'm getting those types of strikes, I call them short strikes or weak strikes. I switch color, and I make that's when I start to tweak the color variation. So it means that I'm throwing it in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
If you're throwing if you're throwing a lure where there's fish, you should be getting bites. It really doesn't matter, um, what you're throwing. If you're throwing it in the right depth and you're getting bites, you're
Mm-hmm.
doing something right. And they're just if you're getting those short strikes and you're getting those things, there's something about what you're throwing that just needs tweaked. And so that's when I would go,
They
okay,
want
well,
cheese on their hamburger.
let
They
me,
just don't want the
yeah,
hamburger. They want a
yeah.
cheeseburger.
Well, let me put that chartreuse on there. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
dip this in a little bit of chartreuse dye,
yeah, just
right?
something
Like
a little different.
just something, just a little
Hmm.
tweak, small tweak. Maybe I'll throw a black and blue one if it really gets frustrating. And I'll be honest, that ruined my crossroad chances last year. Was I didn't make that adjustment. I fished the
Huh.
jig all day in our cedar tournament last year, and I was getting these little bites. I wasn't bringing fish into the boat. Um, and I didn't make any adjustments. And then this year I learned. Secondly, you start seeing that 2-3 missed attempts. You only get 10, on average, you're going to get like 10 or 12 bites
A
a day.
day. Yeah.
You have to get 5 fish in the boat. That's rule
Hmm.
number one: tournament fishing. 5 fish in the boat is going to put you in the top 10. So you try to make those adjustments early, 1 or 2 bites. Um, that's going to tell you all the difference. Downsize, upsize, just small adjustments. But if you're getting bites, you're doing something right, and you
You're at
shouldn't
the
try to
right
get
place.
too
You're putting the
far off.
right. Yeah, you're almost getting the right bait. They're just short striking it.
Yeah.
So yeah, just change something small. Uh,
I'm trying to think.
well, that's
I
pretty
do a
exhausting.
I do a big hook set on them whenever when I'm
Yeah.
jig fishing, and I hook set up. I don't try to if I'm swim jigging, I'll do a lot of side hooks. But
Hmm.
if I'm flipping a jig and I'm letting that thing sit on the bottom, I want to come up with it. And the second thing I do is once I feel like I have a good hook set, my rod immediately goes then down to the water back, because
Oh.
those fish that are deep, when you put a good hook set in them on that kind of finesse technique, in my experience, they're going to shoot to the surface about as quickly as you've ever seen a fish shoot to the surface.
Wow.
And I know you hook set, and it's going to be a 1 count, 2 count, and they're going to be jumping in a
Wow.
lot of scenarios. And um,
It's another reason for the high speed reel, right?
I've lost it. So there was a
Yeah.
specific point that Dustin I mentioned earlier in the video when we were practicing and doing the monthly last in 2022, and we were fishing this one point. He gets there, first 2 casts, just monsters, hook sets, fish comes up, spits them.
Mm.
Hook sets, fish comes up, jumps, spits monster bass,
Yeah.
5 pound plus. And so we were like, we found this spot. We ended up figuring out, hey, there's some structure here on this point. And, we ended up fishing. I ended up fishing that the rest of July almost. I'd go out there for like 8 hours a day. I did that like 2 or 3 times during that month, and ended up catching like about 105.5 inches in the monthly.
Oh, gee.
And, and the only difference that I made, he didn't get any. He ended up with no fish off that point hardly, because the fish were jumping on. And so I proactively, when I'm fishing those fish that are in the deeper water, I come up with the hook set and then immediately try to get my rod tip kind of near the water to get prepared for a jump and to pull them back down. And so when I do see that they come up near the surface, rod tip's a foot. I try to get the rod tip about a foot down in the water. The jig, this is something else about the jig that's specific to the jig, because this, we all should have some experience, fighting fish here. But the reason I think that this is so important for the jig is this end of the jig is in the fish's mouth, it's in his lip. This end is anywhere from 3/8, half ounce, 3/4 of an ounce weight. And so when that fish goes in head shakes, it's not like a Texas rig, right, where the weight might be flying off and who knows what.
It's right there.
It's right there, and that's just like a little it's just like a little counterweight. Yep. And if you flip that, you can feel how that thing kind of pulls and turns, and that can pop that hook right out of the fish's mouth. So I really do not want a fish to jump and head shake with a jig. I've watched videos and read, and I'll be honest, Dustin and I, as nerdy as we are about fishing, will sit and debate. Like when we're driving to tournaments and we're carpooling, we will just sit there and debate for 30 minutes about, technique on how to keep fish on a jig, and come up with this idea, like have kind of developed these theories on the right rod to use and the right jig. And I'll be honest, I haven't changed much about how I fish a jig from 2022 to 2023. In 2022, I was just like always just outside the money. In 2023, what changed is those bites have been converted into fish that are getting measured. So the primary difference in my fishing between 22 and 23 is just studying the technique of how to take a bite, translate that to a good hook set, and how to pin the fish and keep them into the boat.
Now, is that when you went to the medium heavy as well?
Yeah. Last year I was using, I was probably using a rocket, so I was probably using a 10-1, which I think is too fast.
Okay.
I will admit, at the end of probably like August 1st last year is when I probably made the decision to switch to an 8-1. And it was after July, it was after August. I was like, when I was rethinking all my rods for this year and was kind of going down that route, I was like, no, I'm doing 7.6 medium heavy for all my jig rods. So I keep 2, and I'm so committed to the jig. I have 2 dedicated jig rods, 2 7.6, both with an 8-1 Abu Garcia reel. And in the months of June, July, and August, I will 100% have both. I will have 2 jig rods with me.
Nice.
No.
Awesome. So you started out we've talked about different types of jigs, mainly one manufacturer. Now you said football head is what a lot of people have traditionally known when they think of a jig. So there are other head styles that you go to. And I think like the one missile bait that you hung up there, the Ike and Ellie, I think is a different. It's not a football head. It's more of a I don't know
It's
how
a
you describe that.
flipping jig.
It's just a.
They call it a flipping jig, and I don't know how to describe the shape of that,
Hmm.
but it's kind of um,
It's like a football, but from the
it's
other
kind of
end.
tilted
It's
the
like
other way. Yeah, so a football jig
yeah.
normally would be longer this way, and I don't know.
Hmm.
I'll be honest, I don't fish many football jigs. I don't think I have a single football jig in my
Hmm.
jig box that's up here. Um, to me, the flipping jig is an alternative to the football head jig.
Okay.
To give you an idea of some of that variance, if you're kind of newer to this, for example, this is a swim jig. So very similar. You got that hook, you got the guard, you got the skirt. This is a bluegill color, but that head is way more narrow, right? And if you go the opposite from the flipping jig, you get the swim jig. If you go the opposite way and you fatten up that head, you get the football jig. And I hear all kinds of people talk. Some people like to throw the football jig when they're on rocks.
Hmm.
Some people don't like it on rocks because they think I personally think the football jig head gets kind of jammed in the crevices and rocks a little too easy, gets hung up.
Yeah, I've had that problem a lot with it. After a conversation with you, actually, I tried something like an Ellie, those mini flips and stuff, and really like those.
If if this isn't evidence that
Wear the
that
paint
rocks
right
that this
off of
thing
it.
doesn't get stuck in rocks, I
Yeah,
don't
I
know what it
know.
is.
Yeah, absolutely.
uh,
Wow, so that was a great class. Thanks, Professor. Appreciate that. It's fantastic. So we covered the when, we covered the where, the how. We covered the rod and reels, talked everything from technique to hook set. Hey, let me ask. This is a kind of a couple questions on. Let's talk about knots. So when you've got two knots you're dealing with. So what do you like to use from braid to leader?
so braid the leader,
Yeah.
I think it's an arbor knot.
Okay.
Is
Real
that right?
simple. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
kind of want to. Oh, we went over this a long time. No, arbor knot is what I tie on to get the tie my line under my reel. I think. Or is it an anchor
Okay.
knot?
Yeah. Traditionally, that's what's used
It's
around your
something with
reel.
an A. I mean, I
Okay.
don't know the exact name of it, but
What
I
about
make a
on your
loop at the
jig?
fluoro, put the braid through it, wrap it
Yeah.
around down,
Okay.
and then wrap it back up, back through the eye, pull tight.
Okay.
It's real quick. It's really easy. I can do it on the water.
Perfect.
I don't, I do at least I think 6 wraps down and then 6 wraps back,
Okay.
so it's like 12
Okay.
wraps. It's a really good leader knot. I can look up the name and maybe we can drop it in
Yeah.
the
Yeah. We can
comment
put it in
section
there.
later.
Yeah.
And then I use a Palomar. I call it a modified. I'll call it the Kessler knot. Is my lure knot. Um,
Yes or not?
it's a Palomar knot, but it's when I finish the Palomar knot, I take the tag end and I leave my you Palomar knot. You take the loop
Mm-hmm.
through, and then you kind of do a single knot. I leave the eye open, take the lure through the loose end, the tag end. I will wrap back through
Okay.
the center, and I learned it that way when I was a kid. I don't think the original. When I look up the original Palomar knot, they don't do that extra loop through with the tag end.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's kind of a modified Palomar knot, and I use that for everything on
All right. Yeah.
lures.
That's probably 85% of the time. That's what I do too.
Yeah.
I don't do the extra step, but yeah, that's awesome. All right. Well, Jonathan, I can't thank you enough. Number one, for just being a good representative of the sport and being so open about what is you've really used successfully to win and place very high in a lot of tournaments. Um, so it's I remember the first time I noticed you during a tournament sitting in the same spot. I was going down the lake. I'm like, okay, I like this Jonathan over there, and I spent 2-3 hours. And I'm coming back to going the other direction. You're still in the same spot, and that's exactly what you were doing. Now I know.
Yeah, we're both tight
Yeah.
windows, and you
Yeah.
find spots where those big females feed, and you just. So last year, my commitment was I need to catch 5 fish every single tournament.
That's a hard
With the
job
exception of
sometimes.
with the exception of one tournament,
Mm.
it's pretty much there. And then this year, it was 80 inches, and so that was my way to target the bigger females. Was I found
Okay.
found where they were, I stayed there.
Yeah, it
The
definitely paid off.
the one tournament I left was St. Christ. It was the one tournament I didn't place in. So or didn't place in the
Uh,
top 10 or so in. But
yeah,
you
that
know,
was a tough one. I didn't make that. That was the only one I missed last year. But well, thank you again for taking the time this evening, and certainly, if anyone has any questions, wants to clarify anything that Jonathan was talking about, they can reach out to the podcast or look you up on Facebook and send you a message. You've always been just great, forthcoming, and let everybody know exactly what you're doing, and just for the betterment of the sport. So, thanks
yeah,
again, Jonathan. Awesome job.
you're welcome. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the podcast. We'll have another episode coming out pretty quick. Go out there and dig out those jigs and see what kind of big fat girls you can put in your boat.